Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that can transform your development process. It allows you to rapidly build custom designs without leaving your HTML. In this Tailwind CSS course, Rachel Johnson from Scrimba will teach you to create a visually appealing, fully responsive product card for an e-commerce site, enhancing both your design and coding skills.
Hello everyone! Welcome to this exciting new course on Tailwind CSS. My name is Rachel and I'm a developer and lifelong learner. This course introduces some intermediate Tailwind concepts that you'll love using for rapid building and styling of websites. If you're new to Tailwind, I recommend checking out Scrimba's Learn Tailwind CSS to get familiar with the basics, and then come back here for this project. We'll be building on the knowledge from that course and dive into even more amazing things that Tailwind can do. We'll be using Tailwind CSS to create a web page for our client who has given us these mockups as reference, one for desktop and one for mobile. To get us started, I've provided some base unstyled HTML for us, installed Tailwind via the CDN, and included the fonts we'll be using for these mockups. One quick note, because we're using the Tailwind CDN, you might see a little warning message every time you save, like this. This warning just reminds us that the CDN isn't recommended for production use because it can lead to slower load times. But for our purposes in this course, it's perfectly fine, and as you can see, the message will disappear after a few seconds. Now let's explore what we'll be covering in this course. First, we'll start by learning how to tweak the tailwind.config object to make Tailwind work exactly how you want it to. Next, discover how to bring in and style custom fonts to give your projects a unique personality. We'll then find out how to control the maximum width of your content for a cleaner, more responsive design. We'll then dive into styling text, ensuring that your typography looks fantastic. Then learn how to add depth and visual interest with Tailwind's easy-to-use gradient utilities. And lists are everywhere. We'll show you how to make them both functional and visually appealing with Tailwind. And we'll master layout design with Tailwind's intuitive CSS grid utilities, perfect for creating complex and responsive designs. Then we'll see how to seamlessly integrate background images that look great on any screen size, and create dynamic visual effects with Tailwind's transform and transition classes for smooth, engaging animations. And finally, discover how to use arbitrary values for those times when you need something outside of Tailwind's default utility classes. By the end of this course, you'll have a toolkit of techniques to supercharge your Tailwind CSS projects. So I hope you're excited to get started, and I'll see you in the next scrim. Before we dive into new concepts, let's start with a super quick recap of Tailwind CSS and its capabilities. If you're new to Tailwind, I highly recommend checking out Scrimba's Learn Tailwind CSS course to get up to speed at your own pace. Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework that comes with built-in classes, allowing us to quickly style our web page directly in the HTML document. With Tailwind, we can create complex and great-looking layouts without writing any CSS code from scratch. Let's recap what we know with a simple demo. Here I have 3 section elements with text in each. Let's explore some of Tailwind's features using these sections. First, the predefined color palette. Tailwind comes with a wide range of colors, like red and blue, that you can use directly in your HTML. These colors have varying shades from 50 to 950, making it easy to create consistent designs. Let's give each of these sections a different background and text color. First, we'll add the class list. And then let's do background purple 500 and text white. Note that if we want to use white or black, we don't have to specify a shade. Let's give this a save, and we can see that this took immediately. For the second section, let's add our class list, background teal 200 and text teal 700. For the last one, over here, let's go with background stone 700 and text rose 500. And as you can see, we got all of this without writing a lick of CSS. Next up is font systems. By default, unstyled text is a sans serif font, as we can see in the preview, but it's super easy to change between Tailwind's sans serif, serif, and mono fonts. Let's set the first section to a sans serif font by adding font sans. We can set the second section to a serif font by adding font serif. And finally, let's set this last section to a mono font by adding font mono. Save that, and you can see the three sections feature their different fonts. Next, padding and margins. Tailwind provides super fast classes to quickly specify what padding and margins we want to assign our HTML elements. For example, let's put P-4 to our first element to give it padding on all sides. Let's try MB8 on our second element to give it margin on just the bottom. And finally, let's add PT2 to our last element to give it padding on just the top. These numbers use Tailwind's numbering system, which uses a consistent scale based on multiples of a base unit. This unit is usually 4 pixels or 0.25 rem by default. So this P4 would be giving 1 rem or 16 pixels padding to all sides. Now we're up to Flexbox. Tailwind simplifies Flexbox layout with its handy utility classes. We can control the direction, alignment, wrapping, and more without writing any CSS. To make an element a Flexbox, we simply have to assign the class Flex. Let's add it to our body. When we save, we can see that the default Flexbox direction of row has been applied. From here, we can easily change the direction to a column by adding flex col. We can also adjust the alignment with items center, which centers our flex children. Now we can also see justification in action if we revert this back to a row and add justify between. Now this one is a little tricky to see until you drag it out, and then you can see that the spacing between each child is even. We'll bring this back. But I do like the column layout, so let's change this back to flex col. Next up is responsive breakpoints. Tailwind makes it super easy to apply styles to specific screen sizes or larger. We simply have to prefix our classes with a breakpoint. For example, let's style this last section over here differently if the screen size exceeds Tailwind's medium breakpoint. Let's add some classes with a medium breakpoint. I'm going to close the preview for now so we can see what we're doing. Let's add medium, background rose 500, medium text stone 700, and medium padding 6, and also medium margin 4. Hit save, and nothing's changed just yet, but if you resize this window to medium or larger, we can see that the background color, the text color, the margin, and the padding have all changed once the screen hits a medium breakpoint. And if we go back, it goes back to normal. Finally, we have the hover modifier. Just like the responsive breakpoints, Tailwind provides a handy hover prefix that lets us style elements when a user hovers over it with their cursor. For example, let's add a hover state to the first section. Hover, background green, 500. Make sure to save, And now as we hover over this first section, notice how the background color changes from purple to green, just like that. So that wraps up our quick recap of the basics of Tailwind CSS. We've covered how to use Tailwind's color palette, font systems, padding, margins, flexbox, breakpoints, and hover modifiers. Now let's dive into some intermediate topics that will take your Tailwind skills to the next level. I'll see you in the next scrim. As you know from the recap, Tailwind has a lot of built-in colors, fonts, and features that we can tap into and use. These are super handy, and the team at Tailwind has carefully put together colors and fonts that work well with each other and on the web. But sometimes we may have a very specific set of fonts and colors from a client that they want us to use. The mockup that we have is a good example. It's orange, but it's most likely not one of the oranges that Tailwind provides. We can also see that the font is not the same sans serif font that comes packaged with Tailwind. So how do we break out of the default styles provided, or are we stuck with them? In Tailwind's own words, Tailwind has been designed from the ground up to be extensible and customizable, so that no matter what you're building, you never feel like you're fighting the framework. And this is where the tailwind.config object comes in. The tailwind.config object is where the magic of customization happens. Think of it like a control center for all of your Tailwind styles. By editing and adding to the tailwind.config object, we can customize the default Tailwind configuration with our own design elements. All we have to do is target the tailwind.config object, tap into the theme, and then into extend. Then we can extend the theme by providing our own customization, such as colors. Let's see this in action. First, we'll have to create a new config.js file in the root directory. New file, config.js. Now we have to make sure to link the script to our HTML underneath the CDN. Script, src, config.js, and close the script tag. Now we'll head back to config.js. Tailwind.config equals, open the curly brackets, theme, extend. Now we're adding new colors, so we'll target colors. To assign a new color to Tailwind, simply enter the desired color name as the key and the color value, in our case a hex code, as the value. Here I'll input my favorite color and give it the name of my teal. 008080. Give that a save, and now we can use it in our HTML. Head back over here. Let's change this white to my teal and give it a save. And just like that, we can see our custom style in action. Now that we've learned how to create and add to our config object, let's try it with our project. As we talked about before, we want to use the orange colors that the client has specifically provided for us in the mockup. So let's add them to our Tailwind config object. In the next slide, I've provided the hex codes for the 3 shades of orange that we see in the mockup. I've also included on the next slide the Tailwind config syntax for your reference. Now the slides will be tucked away down here, but just know that you can open them back up and flip between them as you see fit. Now it's over to you. Here are your 3 tasks for this scrim. First, create the config.js. Then, assign the 3 types of orange colors to your config object. And then, change the body element's background color to the custom pale orange. So give it a go, and I'll be right here when you get back. How did you go? Here's how I would do it, but just remember that you could have done things differently, and that's totally fine. So first, I came over here to the Explorer. I clicked these 3 buttons, and you won't see it in the recording, but you will create a new file, and we'll call it config.js over here. Then I had a look at the syntax, popped it down here so I can still see it, tailwind.config, and then theme, extend, colors. And then here I put the 3 colors in. Let's have a look at what they were. Pale orange, light orange, and orange. Here I used snake case, which is lowercase everything except for spaces, which is an underscore. So pale orange is FFD9A6. And then light orange is FBB03B. And finally orange by itself is F7931E. Give that a save. And then I headed back to index.html and made sure that I included the script like so. Config.js, and close the script tag, give that a save. Now I checked that it was all working by changing the color of the page's background. So we can see from the mockup over here that it is the pale orange, plus that was task 3. So I came over here to the body. Then I added the class list and said background pale orange. Give it a save. And there we go. There is your first project scrim done. Great start to your client project. Another common custom style that developers add to their config object is the font. While the default Tailwind fonts are lovely, clients will almost always have their preferred fonts. In this scrim, I have already imported 2 of my favorite Google fonts, Bebas New and Roboto Slab. I've also already created and linked a config.js file for us with the basic Tailwind config object extending the theme. So let's have a look at how to add these 2 fonts to our config object. First, we simply have to add another section to extend called font family, spelled like that. In this object literal, we must first give the font family a name, just like we did the colors earlier. Tailwind already has 3 font family names, sans, serif, and mono. We can choose to override any of these by specifying the name here. Since we won't be using the sans font that they provided, we can override it with Bebas New, like so. And then opening an array, Bebas New, and sans serif. For our other font, let's create a new font family name, Slab. We can do this by simply naming it as the value of the key, like so, Slab. And then entering the value of Roboto Slab and serif. The values provided in these arrays are the same as the font stack that you're likely familiar with in CSS. The first one is our first preference for the font, followed by any other that we would like to use, and then finally the browser's fallback sans serif font. Once we save this, we can see that the override is already working. Our text over here is already Bebas New. In order to see Roboto Slab in action, we simply have to come back here and give something a class of font slab. Let's add it to this h2 here. Font slab, and save it. And we can see that our slab font is being used over here. So that was super easy. Now let's hop back to our client's project and have a go at changing the font. As we can already see, another aspect of the client's mockup that can't be handled using Tailwind's default styles is the font family. We can see 2 font families being used here, one for the title and subtitle, and another for basically everything else. The title is a Google font called Playfair Display SC, and the body is another Google font called Josephine Sans. The Google font link for both of these fonts have already been included for you in this scrim. On the next slide, I have also provided the font stacks for both fonts and also the syntax for adding a font family to the config object. As always, you can access these slides by clicking on them in the bottom left-hand corner and navigating between them using your keyboard arrows. Here are your tasks for this scrim. First, override Tailwind's default sans font with the Josephine sans font. Then assign a new font family called Title for Playfair Display. And then, although this will be done by default, make sure that all of the text now uses Josephine Sans, which is our new sans font. And also change the title of the product and the subtitle to Playfair Display. Give it a go, and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. How did you go? This is what I would have done. First, over in the config.js file, I added the font family section to extend. I overrode the sans default by naming it here, and then in an array, I plugged in the font stack values for Josephine Sans. Josephine Sans and sans serif. Next, I created title as the font family name and inserted the font stack for Playfair Display as an array for the value. Playfair Display SC and serif. Once I save this, you can immediately see that all the text has taken on Josephine Sans because we overrode the default sans font. Then I headed back to index.html and I found our title and our subtitle. I'll add a class to both of them. Class, and I want to make these Playfair, which is our title, so I would give it font title. Now when I save it, we can see a single orange and with stem and leaf now take on the Playfair display font. And there we go. Great work. We are now another step closer to our client's mockup. Max width is a feature that's commonly used with vanilla CSS. It allows for elements of our design to retain its maximum width no matter what size the screen is. So it'll be super useful to know how to use this in Tailwind. The syntax for the Tailwind class looks like this: max width, and then an asterisk where the asterisks specify the maximum width of our HTML element. Here we can use Tailwind's numbering system, or we can also tap into Tailwind's pre-built sizes from extra small to 7 extra large. Let's take this card here and try out the max width feature. Note that this section takes up the entire width of the screen because it's a block level item. I've also given the left and right margins a value of auto here to make sure that it's always in the middle. So let's add max width and try out some different values. We'll start with 72. Now you can see here that it gives us a narrower container. And if we make the preview window larger, the container retains its maximum width. When you make it smaller, it scales accordingly. Let's try out another one. Let's go for 96. This does the same thing, but you can see that the maximum width is now a little bit larger. We can also use Tailwind's pre-built sizes, so let's try out large. Now large, you can see, is a little bit bigger than 96, but it still retains the maximum width and scales when it's smaller. And let's try out something crazy like 4XL. And it's very, very large, but it retains its maximum width and scales when it's smaller. So we can easily specify the maximum width of an element, like this card, so it doesn't exceed a certain width, but still scales when the view is smaller. This is super useful to know, especially if you want to have good control over the sizing of your elements, no matter how wide the user's screen is. Nowadays, there are monitors that are super wide, so we have to account for that. So let's take this new knowledge back to our client's project to see how we can use it. Let's check out our mockups again. In both mobile and desktop views, we have a floating card that contains details about a product. This would be a great chance to try out the max width Tailwind class. And while we're at it, let's really take the opportunity to style the card up so it looks more like our mockup. So your challenge for this scrim are these tasks. First, give the card, which is our main element, give the card a white background, and then make sure it takes up 100% width of the parent container, and then use our new max width class and give it a max width of extra small, right here. Next, horizontally center the card so it sits in the middle of the screen, and to do this, you will have to add some classes to body. Now, for our margin and padding, let's just focus on the mobile screen. We will work on the desktop screen a little later down the road. So, have at it, and I will see you when you get back. Welcome back. How did you go? This is what I would have done. First, I will give the main element a white background. Let's add a class list and add background white. Pretty easy. Now, let's make the card 100% width of its parent container by adding width full. Now we'll use what we just learned in the last scrim, max width, and we want a maximum width of extra small. Now, if you save this, and depending on how large your preview window is, you may have to drag it out to see it in action. So anything under extra small, it's still at 100% width. And once it is bigger than extra small, we can see that it retains that maximum width of extra small. We'll make it this big so we can see it. Now, to horizontally center the card so it sits in the middle of the screen, I will add a couple of classes to body. First, I'm going to make it a flex object, and then I'm going to justify center. And when I save that, we can see that it is moved so it is horizontally center. And finally, for the margin and padding, the numbers that worked nicely for me were margin 10 and padding 3. And if we give this a save, we can see that it's got that nice floating card effect. And if we make it a little bit bigger, like so, and we compare it to our mockup, we can see that it is definitely getting very, very close. Great. Our product card is really starting to shape up. Well done. Let's now step away from the new concepts for a little bit and do a bit of styling using the Tailwind skills that we already have, font classes and text classes. While both class families may seem to target the same thing, which is text content, they actually serve pretty distinct purposes in styling text elements. In general, font classes primarily control the typeface and weight of the text. It's used to change the overarching style of the text. You can think of these being the aspects of the typeface or font family that were specifically designed by the typographer. Text classes primarily control the size, color, alignment, and basically all the other properties of the text content. Text classes are used to fine-tune the appearance of text content. One way you can easily remember which prefix to use is fonts for family and figures, and text for traits. This scrim will challenge you to style this part of the mockup: the product title, subtitle, price, and short description. By the end of this scrim, we want this section of our web page looking as close as possible to the mockup. When completing these challenges, try to see if you can remember whether a class has the font prefix or the text prefix. Here are your tasks. First, style the title and subtitle to match the mockup. Next, style the product price. Then do the same for the product description. And finally, space everything out vertically to best match the spacing between these elements. Pause me now and give it a go. Welcome back. This is what I did. First, I handled the title. I came here to the H1 and I added font bold and text to Excel. Then I handled the subtitle. came down here to the P tag and added text, medium. Then I moved on to the product price, this H2. Text 5XL, font light. Now the sense section needs to be a lot smaller, so I gave this span some extra classes. Text large. Then I handled the product description, this P tag. I added font light and text gray 500. And finally, to add some spacing between these three elements, I simply gave our product price a top and bottom margin. So over here back in the H2, I added MY, which is top and bottom, 3. Give this a save, and this is looking pretty close to the mockup. Well done. Color is super important in web design. It could be the difference between a flat design and a design that pops just a little more. One of the ways we can achieve that is using gradients. Just like vanilla CSS, gradients can be achieved by providing a direction and at least 2 gradient color stops. For a simple 2-color gradient, we have to provide Tailwind with 3 classes to work with. The first is background gradient 2. This tells Tailwind the direction of the gradient. We just have to plug in the correct direction into where this asterisk is. It's pretty intuitive too. T for top, R for right, B for bottom, and L for left. We can also provide diagonal directions. TR for top right, BR for bottom right, BL for bottom left, and TL for top left. The next class we must provide is from. This is the first color stop that we want to provide. Here we can use a built-in Tailwind color and shade or a custom color that we've added to our config object. And the final class we must specify is to. This determines the final color stop. Again, we can use a Tailwind color and shade or a custom color from our config object. Let's give it a go now. This is a scrim that contains several section elements, and we're going to give them each a background gradient. There's also a config.js file that contains some custom colors that we'll be using. I'm going to tackle this first section element. We want red 500 to custom orange from top to bottom. So over here, I will add the following classes. Background gradient to bottom, which means it will go from top to bottom. From red 500. Now here I'm plugging in a Tailwind color and shade. And to custom orange. And here I'm using a color from our config object. Save this and we can now see our new background gradient. For the remaining 2 sections, I'm going to challenge you to give it a go by yourself before watching my solution. Feel free to refer back to the slide here at the bottom or have a look at my demo and go from there. So I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back. This is what I did. For our custom green to blue left to right, I did background gradient to right from custom green to blue 200. Give that a save to check it out. There we go. And for this last one, I did background gradient to top right from custom purple to custom pink. And save that. And there we go. So now that we've had some practice with background gradients, let's head back to our project to give our web page a little oomph. Now that we've got this main description part of the product card handled, let's move down to this Add to Cart button and the Wishlist button. Here are your tasks for this scrim. First, apply gradient to the button. We want the light orange to orange custom colors from top to bottom. Then style the rest of the button according to the mockups. Be sure to check the mockup. Have a look at the text color, whether it's uppercase or lowercase, the padding, And just a tip, you will also want to check out the desktop mockup as well. After that, make the wishlist heart icon orange. After you've done that, have the two of them display side by side on the same horizontal line. Just a quick hint, you may want to alter the HTML just a little bit for best results. The heart should take up space on the right, and the button should take up the remaining space on the left, just like this in our mockup. Then we want to make it so that when a user hovers over the button, it inverts the direction of the gradient. So instead of going top to bottom, perhaps it should be going bottom to top. And finally, we want to add some space around the row to set it apart from surrounding elements. And as you can see in the mockup, there is some space above and some space below. So give it a go, and I'll be right here when you get back. Welcome back. This is what I did. First, let's add gradient to the button. So over here in the button tag, we'll open the class and we'll give it a gradient. Background gradient to bottom. It's from light orange, so from light orange to orange. Let's save this, scroll down and have a look, and there we go, we've got the gradient. Now I'm going to hide my preview window just in case I start typing behind the preview, but don't worry, when we save, it will pop back up again. Now we know that the text inside of the button is white, so let's add text white. We also know that it's all uppercase, so we can use the handy class uppercase. Let's give it a save to check it out. Okay, now it looks like we need to add some padding. The bottom padding seems to be a lot larger than the top padding, so we're going to target the top and bottom separately. We're also going to be a bit cheeky and add the padding to the left and right so it matches the desktop mockup. So to do that, I will hide the preview once again, and we can add padding top 2, padding bottom 1, and padding left and right 4. Save it, scroll down, and we can see that it's definitely very, very close to that desktop mockup. Next, we've got this heart. Now this one is super easy. We just have to come here to the SVG and then give it a class of fill orange. Save that, and we can see that the heart is now orange. Next up, I want to display these side by side on the same horizontal line. Now personally, I think the best way to do this is to use a flex container. So I will hide the preview again. I'll come here to the button, go above it, and I'll create a new section with a class of flex because I know I want this to be a flex box. I'll close the section. I'll grab the button and the SVG and I'll paste it inside the section. Give this a save, and we can see that it's already in a horizontal line. But I want this heart icon to align itself horizontally. And because this is a flex container, it is as easy as adding items center. Next up, we need to make sure this button spans the remaining space of that flex container. And because it is a flex container, this can be done very easily by simply adding to the button flex grow, which grows the child to take up the remaining space. Give this a save. And we can see that it has indeed grown to fill the remaining space. But now the heart is looking a little bit squished, so let's give it some left margin. Come back here to the SVG class list, and we can add margin left 2. Now let's handle the hover effect of the button. When we hover over it, we want the gradient to be inverted. So instead of top to bottom, we want it to go from bottom to top. So over here in the button class, we just have to add hover and then background gradient to top. Give this a save, and let's try it out. Once we hover over it, we can see that it does in fact invert. And finally, I'm going to put some space above and below the row to set it apart from surrounding elements. This is super easy to do because we have a parent container. All we have to do is come up to this flex container that we created and add some margins. Margin Y, which is top to bottom, and 4. Give that a save. And we can see that there is some nice space above and below our row. Well done! We are again closer to our client mockup. Lists are a fundamental part of web design. Whether you're displaying a menu, a set of features, or even just a list of items. The way we style these lists can make a big difference in readability and visual appeal. This scrim has an unordered list of ingredients and an ordered list of recipe steps. By default, Tailwind removes all the expected styling we're used to with vanilla CSS. This scrim shows HTML lists, but none of the dots or numbers. We can see that while these are list elements, they all just look like paragraphs. With Tailwind, it's up to us to style these however we want. There are 3 list style types we can use: list disk, list decimal, and list none, which is the default that we're seeing right now. Let's see the other 2 in action. We can see here in the HTML that our list of ingredients should be an unordered list as the developer has used UL. In order to get the dot points to appear, we simply have to give the UL a class of list disk. Save that, and the dots will appear. Now, for your first mini challenge, see if you can give this list of instructions its numerical list styling by using list decimal on this OL right here. Pause me to give it a go. Welcome back. This is what I did. I added class, list, decimal. Give that a save, and we can see the numbers. Now we can see from the preview that the list markers are right up against the container, so we will have to do a bit of positioning using padding and margin. In this list of ingredients, I'll give each list item some left padding and margin. I'll select multiple rows and add class, margin left 5, and padding left 3. Give that a save, and there we go. Each list item has been spaced away from the left edge, and the list contents are also spaced away from the markers themselves. It's time for your next mini challenge. Can you give this list of instructions some left margin and padding as well? Pause me to give it a go. Welcome back. Here's what I did. Just like before, I selected multiple rows and added class, margin left 5, and padding left 3. There we go. One more super cool thing that we can do to lists using Tailwind is to style the markers themselves. We simply have to use the marker prefix in the UL or the OL class list. Let's turn all of these ingredient markers to green. We just have to add marker, text, green, and let's give it a shade of 400. Save, and there we go. And as your final mini challenge, can you turn all of the markers of the instructions to a nice purple, maybe purple 400? Pause me and I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back once again. Here's what I did. After list decimal, I added marker, text, purple 400, and once we save it, there you go. So now let's take our new understanding of list styling with Tailwind back to our product card project. The product card we have here has an unordered list of features. It will need some styling to make it match the mockup. Along with your newfound list styling skills, you'll also need to use what you already know about fonts and text. Your tasks for this scrim are as follows. First, style the features heading to match the mockup. Next, style the unordered list with dot points. And then make the dot points orange, our custom orange. And finally, style the list content according to the mockup. Be sure to have a look at size, weight, and color of the text in the mockup. So, off you go and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. Let's walk through one solution together. Let's head down here to the Features section, and we'll start with styling the Features header. Here, we'll give it some classes. According to the mockup, this header was uppercase, so we'll add uppercase first. Then if we have a look, it is quite light, so I'm going to give it a font weight of light. And finally, I want to give it a text size of large. Give it a save, and let's scroll down to have a look. That looks pretty close to the mockup. Next, let's give this unordered list its dot points. We'll come here to the UL and add the class list disk. Give this a save, and we can see that the dot points are there. But just like our previous scrim, the dot points are falling off the container a little bit. So let's give it some margin and padding. Over here in every list item, I will give it a class of margin left 3 and padding left 2. Give this a save. And now the dot points are sitting nicely within the container. Our next step was to make sure that the dot points themselves are orange. Now this one was quite easy. We'll have to come up here to the unordered list and give it marker text orange. Give that a save, and we have our orange markers. Finally, I want to keep styling this until it matches the mockup a little more. So first I'm going to start with text size. In the UL, I will add text small, and that's a little bit closer. And also in the mockup, you may notice that it's not quite black, so I will give it a different color. Text gray 600. Now I also feel that this text is a little bit weighty or thick compared to the mockup, so I will go ahead and make everything a lighter weight. I will hide the preview window just in case, and we'll type font light for that lighter weight. And there we go. But speaking of weight, you may have noticed in the mockup that the first section of each list item is thicker. So we will come back here, hide the preview, and we will make each span element medium instead of light. So let's select all of them, give them each a class of font medium. Now when we save, we can see that each of these have a medium weight compared to the rest of the line, which has a light weight. And there we have it. We've got our feature section that matches the mockup a lot better than it did before. Well done. CSS Grid is one of the most widely used layout features in modern web development, and Tailwind gives us access to this through a collection of handy classes. This scrim contains 8 divs that we want to arrange into a grid, so it will be a good place to explore how to use Grid with Tailwind. In order to use Grid, we must first turn a container into a grid. With vanilla CSS, we do this by using display::grid. In Tailwind, all we have to do is give the element a class of grid, like so. From here, we just need to specify how many columns and rows we want. If you're familiar with CSS Grid, you'll know that this takes quite a bit of typing, especially if we want the cells to be responsive to its container. So this might look quite familiar. Repeat, 3, min max, 0, 1, fr, and you might have to do the same thing but for rows. Now Tailwind makes this super easy for us. These 2 lines of CSS can be simplified into just the following Tailwind classes: grid rows 3 and grid cols 3. If we save, we'll see this in action. And if we want the grid to span the full height of the entire container, we simply have to add h full, like that. Now, since we don't have a 9th div, let's stretch out the 8th div so it spans the last 2 columns. Now, normally in CSS, we would have to do this: grid, column, span 2, span 2. But with Tailwind, all we have to do is come to the 8th div and do col span 2. And when we save it, we'll see that. Now, finally, one of my favorite parts of using grid is access to the gap property, which allows us to control the gap between columns and rows. With Tailwind, all we have to do is add gap-number to the grid container, where the number is the size of the gap you'd want to use using Tailwind's number system. So gap-1 will add a 4-pixel gap between grid elements, as we can see. And just like that, and with a lot less typing than vanilla CSS, we have ourselves a grid with gaps and contents that span columns. So let's take our new knowledge back to the product card project to see how we can use it in a real situation. At the moment, it doesn't seem like we need to use grid at all. All the elements of the product card are nicely stacked already, as they should be in mobile view. But if we check out the desktop mockup, we can see that the image sits on the left by itself, and all the remaining content is on the right. Grid would be a great candidate to easily lay out those elements as we see here. Since we're working with different screen sizes now, you will need to use Tailwind breakpoints. So be sure to check out Tailwind's documentation if you need a refresher. Here are your tasks for this scrim. First, use grid to have the image and content sitting side by side when the screen is larger than MD. Now, you may need to alter the HTML structure a little bit for the best results. Next, when the screen is larger than MD, change the card's maximum width to 3XL. After that, add some gap so the content and the image aren't sitting super close to each other. And finally, while we're at it already, let's alter the size of the title, the subtitle, the add to cart button, and product card padding when the screen is larger than MD so it matches the mockups more closely. So I'll let you give that a go, and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. Let's walk through what I would have done. First, I'm going to hide the preview, just in case we can't see what I'm typing. Then I'm going to separate the image with the rest of the content by creating a new section element. Section, close that. Grab absolutely everything and pop it in there. Now for screen sizes larger than MD, I want to make the main container, which is our card, a grid. So medium grid. And I know I want to have them sitting side by side, so this will be a grid with 2 columns. Medium grid, cols 2. As per our second task, I also want to make sure that the card's maximum width is now 3XL if the screen is larger than MD. So MD, max width 3XL. Let's see what this looks like now. We'll give it a save. And let's make this preview window larger. And we can see that we definitely have our 2 columns that splits the image to the left and content to the right. Now we can move on to our third task, which is adding some gap so the content and the image aren't sitting super close to each other, which we can see that it is. We'll hide this once again. And in our main, we will add MD, gap. Let's give it 4. Let's save that to check it out. That's pretty good. The 2 pieces of content have now separated, and it's much nicer to look at. Now, if we check out the mockup, we can see that the desktop has a bit more padding. So let's do that. We'll hide the preview, and back up here, we'll add some more padding. So medium padding, let's give it 5. Okay, let's save it. And as you can see now, there's a bit more spacing on all sides of this card. Now let's check out the desktop mockup to see what else needs changing. Most of the text will need a little bit of fine-tuning to better match the mockup, and the Add to Cart button no longer fills out the full width. So let's head back into our text content. We'll hide the preview so we can see what we're doing. First, for the H1, I will add, for medium screens and above, text will be 3XL. For our subtitle, For medium, screens are above, text will be XL. And then down here for the button, for medium screens and above, we will turn off flex grow by going flex, none. Okay, let's save it now and see what it looks like. It's looking pretty good. It also matches the mockup quite well. So well done, and I'll see you in the next scrim. Adding background images is something commonly done with CSS. A nice, subtle pattern gives an element or a page just a bit of oomph. In this scrim, I have a simple page that needs a bit of a subtle background. There are two images in the directory, desktop.jpg and mobile.jpg, that I want to use based on the screen size. If the screen is mobile sized, I want to use the mobile pattern so it's more visible. If it's medium or larger like this, I want to use the desktop pattern that features a larger pattern so there aren't as many tiny repeated objects. The main container itself has been given a width and a height of full so it fills the entirety of the browser screen. Our first step is to add references to these two image files to our config object over in our config.js. Inside of the extend section, we want to target a new section, the background image object literal. In here, I'll create two key value pairs, one for each image. I'll call the first one mobile, as it's the pattern we want to use for mobile screens. For the value, I'm going to type a very familiar pattern for assigning a background image path using CSS. URL mobile.jpg. Then I'll do the same for our desktop pattern. Desktop for the key and URL desktop.jpg as the value. We'll give that a save and then we can head back to our HTML. Now this is where the magic happens. I'll give the main section a class of background mobile. Remember, mobile is what we called the pattern over in our config.js. Now when we save, we can see a nice hex background pattern for our web page. To change it for screen sizes larger than the built-in Tailwind medium size, we simply have to add medium as a prefix. I'll hide the preview window just so we can see what's happening. And we'll type medium as a prefix, background, desktop, and when we save, we'll see the preview window pop back up. We can't see it in action now, but if we make it bigger, we can see that the background pattern changes accordingly. When it's smaller than medium, it is a smaller pattern, and when it's larger than medium, we can see the larger pattern in action. But what if we only wanted one of these hex patterns on the page, and only on the top right of the page? Normally, with vanilla CSS, we'd need to tap into background repeat and background position. But with Tailwind, it's super easy. Let's hide the preview window again to make sure we can see what we're typing. We can simply do background no repeat and background right top. Now, background no repeat is pretty self-explanatory, and background right top could refer to any part of the parent container. Let's give this a save and see what it looks like. As you can see, the pattern is only there on the top right corner, and if we resize it to a larger window, we can see that it still changes to that larger pattern, and there is still only one on the top right. Now, right top is not the only place that we could put it. We could actually also do stuff like left bottom. We can now see that the image has moved, but it's just peeking out from the bottom left-hand corner, and that's because our content here is longer than the window's height. If we scroll down, we can see the full pattern there. If we want to affix this background to the window itself, we can use background fixed, which is also pretty self-explanatory. If we save now, we can see now that the pattern stays here in the bottom left-hand corner no matter how much the user scrolls. And there we go. That's background images with Tailwind. Let's head back to our project with our new understanding of how to work with background images. You may have noticed in the mockups that there is a very subtle but present background image assigned to each product card. There's a mobile version, as well as a desktop version background image, and both of these have been provided in the scrim. Now that you know how to add image paths to your config object and then use them, it's your turn to give it a go for this project. Your tasks are to first add both images to the config object, then give your main element a background image, but using the mobile image, which is this one. And then add a class that changes this background image to the desktop one, which is this one, when the screen is larger than medium. So give it a go. I'll be right here when you get back. Welcome back. Let's walk through it together. First, let's head over to config.js. Over here, we'll add background image. I will call the first one mobile, and the value will be URL background mobile.png. And then the other one I will call desktop. And just like before, we'll do URL background desktop.png. Okay, give that a save. Nothing should have changed yet. Then we'll head back to index.html and add this to the main. Now I will just close this preview. We'll do background mobile. Let's just see what this looks like by saving it. Great. We have the mobile image background. However, we want it to just happen once, and we want it at the bottom of the card. So there's a few more classes to add. Background no repeat, and background bottom. Save that, and we can see that it only repeats once, and it is stuck to the bottom of the card, and there's nothing at the top. Very nice. And finally, we want to add a class that changes the background image to the desktop image when the screen is larger than MD. So this one is super simple with just one class, MD, background, desktop. Give that a save, and let's drag this out and see that it is in fact there. Well done. Transforms are a key part of CSS animations, and Tailwind comes with a range of easy-to-use transforming classes. First, we have scale, which matches up to our CSS transform property with a value of scale. Then we have scale X or Y, which represents the transform property with a value of scale X or scale Y. We just have to specify which one in the Tailwind class. Next, we've got rotate, which is the CSS transform property with the value of rotate. And finally, translate X and Y, which targets the CSS transform property once again with the value of translate X or translate Y. What we would normally put in the parentheses after each one of these values is what we would put in the asterisks of the Tailwind class, with the exception of translate. This scrim has 4 icons, so let's have a play using each of the transforming classes. Just a quick note, I've placed the HTML's class attribute on its own line, separate from all the other properties. Keeping the classes on their own line will help us see them more clearly. Let's start with scale. Tailwind comes packaged with a few commonly used scale values. So let's try one of the smallest and one of the largest. For example, scale 50 will make this house icon half of its original size. And scale 150 will make it 1.5 times its original size. Be sure to check out the documentation for a full list of supported classes, because if we try something like 140, it doesn't do what you expect. Next, we'll try out scale X and scale Y. This works the same way as scale, but we specify the X or Y axis. So for this star icon, let's come here and specify scale X, 50. This would squish the star icon to half of its original size, but just on the X axis. And in contrast, if we change this to Y, we'll see that it flattens the star icon by making it half of its original size on the Y axis. Next, we have rotate, and we'll do it on this icon here because gears usually rotate. This one is super simple. Let's add rotate 45 to our third icon, and once we save it, we can see that it tilts a little bit to the left. We can even rotate it in the opposite direction to the right by placing a minus at the beginning of the class, like so. Give this a save, and we'll see that the icon rotates to the right instead of the left. And finally, we have translate, which we'll try on this download icon. Just like the second icon's scale class, we'll need to specify the x-axis or the y-axis, and then we'll specify how far we want the icon to translate. For example, translate x4. We'll move it to the right. Now, I like the idea of a download icon going downwards, so let's try the other direction and change this x to y, and save. Now, let's make this a bit more real world by only triggering these transforms when the user hovers over the image. This is your mini challenge for this scrim. How would you do this? Pause me and give it a go. Welcome back. This is what I did. I simply added, before each of these classes, the hover prefix. Now, if we save it, we can see that it's gone back to normal, but when we hover over it, the transform happens. Like that. Now that we've explored how to use Tailwind's transform utilities to rotate, scale, and translate elements, you can see how these powerful tools can bring dynamic visual effects to your designs. We've covered a lot of ground so far, so let's pause here. In the next scrim, we'll dive into transitions and see how to smoothly animate these transformations to create an even more engaging user experience. I'll catch you there. Now that we've covered transforms, it's time to take things to the next level by adding transitions. Transitions in Tailwind let us control the speed and timing of our transformations, bringing a whole new level of polish to our designs. We'll explore 3 of the transition classes that Tailwind provides. First, we have transition, where the asterisk is the property that we want to transition. We have a lot of options here. We've got none, all, colors, opacity, shadow, and transform. Since we're only playing around with the transform properties here, we'll just use transition-transform for this scrim. But just know that there are lots of others that you can experiment with. Let's give each of our icons a transition transform class. Again, I'll be selecting multiple rows like so, and adding transition transform. Now when we save and we hover over, we can see that each one has a smooth transition. If we want to control the duration or delay of the transition, we also have these 2 classes at our fingertips, duration and delay, both of which will just need a millisecond value plugged into where the asterisk is. For example, we can give this star icon a duration of 1000 milliseconds or 1 second, like so. Duration 1000. And now when we hover over it, we can see that it squishes and unsquishes over the course of 1 second. We can also try out the delay function for our download icon. Let's give it a class of delay 500 for 500 milliseconds. Give it a save, and now when we hover over it, there is a half-second delay before the icon goes down, and when we unhover, there is a half-second delay before it comes back up. Great, let's take what we've learned back to our client project. I'll see you there. Here in the client mockups, a good candidate to try out our newfound transform and transition skills is the wishlist heart button. Here is your one and only task for this scrim. On hover, the heart icon should scale up to 1.25 and have a smooth transition that lasts 300 milliseconds. There's just one task. Go ahead, and I'll be right here when you get back. How did you go? Let's walk through what I would have done. Down here in the SVG, let's add a couple of classes. We want a smooth transition of the transform property, transition transform. Now we want certain things to action on hover, so we will need to add the hover prefix. We want to scale this icon up by 1.25 times its original size, so we'll add scale 125. And finally, we want the duration of this transition to be 300 milliseconds, so we'll add duration 300. Let's give this a save and check it out. When we hover over this heart icon, we can see that it grows and it gets smaller over the course of 300 milliseconds. Well done! Sometimes the well-crafted design system by Tailwind doesn't quite match what we want, as we saw earlier with the colors and fonts. And sometimes we don't feel the need to add these values to our config object. For example, if you really need to go into exact pixels to position something in the right spot. Tailwind's square bracket notation allows us to generate a class on the fly with any arbitrary value. This scrim has a few elements that I want to style with arbitrary values. The first is this image. We can see that it is an absolute element inside of a relative parent, so we can use top. I would like this to be moved up 40 pixels from the top of its parent container so it sits nicely between the header and the content boxes. So I can simply add this, top dash and then the square brackets notation, and in here I can simply put minus 40 pixels. And when I save that, we can see that it's been moved up as we expect the top property to do. Next in this list, I have tailwind.config. It's blending in a bit too much, so I want to make it a little bit larger than the surrounding text so it stands out a bit. So I've got it here already as a span, and what I can do here is I can add text to target the text size, and then the square bracket notation, and then we can do 1.3m because it is a child of the list element, and it will make it bigger. And who doesn't love a good box shadow? I want this div here to have a nice box shadow that isn't one of the styles that is provided by Tailwind. In fact, I want it to be exactly 0 pixels x, 10 pixels down on the y-axis, 2 pixels of fuzziness, and a very specific color. Now, Tailwind's bracket notation doesn't play very well with spaces, just like most programming languages. So instead of spaces, we'll use underscores instead, like so. Shadow, and we've got the bracket notation, 0, which is the x-axis value, underscore, 10 pixels, which is the y-axis value, 2 pixels, which is the fuzziness, and then we'll just do this color, whatever that color is. Now, when we save, we can see that there is a box shadow and it is exactly what we want it to be. And that's how you can use arbitrary values in Tailwind to really fine-tune your designs exactly the way you want without adding anything to the config file. Whether it's positioning elements or adjusting font sizes or customizing shadows, the square bracket notation gives you the flexibility to get it just right. So now that we've seen how powerful this can be, let's head back to our project and put this knowledge into action. The last thing that we need to handle from our mockup is this solid box shadow that our product card is casting. As we learned in the previous scrim, Tailwind's box shadow options don't give us a lot of options. So this is a good chance to use arbitrary values to get what we want. Your final task for this course is as follows. Use arbitrary values to give the product card a box shadow of 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 0, orange, where orange is our custom orange. So give it a go, and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. Let's walk through this final task together. Down here in the main, which is our product card, let's add one final class that uses arbitrary values. Shadow. We'll open and close these square brackets. 5 pixels underscore 5 pixels underscore 0 underscore orange. And now let's save it to see this in action. There we go. We have it in our desktop view, and also, if we make this smaller, in our mobile view as well. Super easy task for your last one. Congratulations on making it to the end of the course. Take a moment to compare your finished project to the original mockups. You've done an amazing job bringing those designs to life using Tailwind CSS. In this course, we've explored a variety of exciting Tailwind CSS concepts, starting with customizing the config object and working with custom fonts. We then moved on to using the max width utility, styling fonts and text, and adding depths with gradients. We also covered creating visually appealing lists, mastering layout design with grid, implementing responsive background images, and applying dynamic effects with transforms and transitions. And finally, we saw how to use arbitrary values to fine-tune our designs. As you move forward, I encourage you to explore the Tailwind CSS documentation further. There is so much more to discover, and the docs are a treasure trove of information and inspiration. And most importantly, I hope you feel confident in using Tailwind CSS in your next project. So thank you once again for joining me on this journey, and happy coding!